Looking for a place to speak your truth? This podcast is on an endless pursuit to build through entrepreneurship, empowerment, and creativity. Through thought-provoking content and a fearlessness to dive into untouched topics with an undeniable dedication to highlighting others who are often overlooked. This is Deep Conversations.
Stay tuned for Deep Conversation Podcast.
Welcome to Deep Conversations Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Ryan Stewart, and today I'm here and I'm blessed to be sitting down with Mr. Charles Ellison. We're going to be discussing the importance of civil literacy and the engagement, especially in a moment like this. But he wants everybody to know, he says, don't panic and don't dismiss it. He wants everybody to be literate, be aware, and be engaged. So again, Mr. Charles, I want to thank you for jumping on my podcast. But can you start by telling us about your background and what led you to become a public affairs strategist?
Right. No, Ryan, I'm honored to be here. Very familiar with your reputation and your program. So I immediately jumped on the opportunity to participate. So really appreciate having this time in this moment with you. I think this is always an important conversation. So for over 2 decades now, 2 decades or more, I've been a public affairs strategist. So I've worked on all levels of government. I've worked in local government, worked for a couple of mayors. Also, I've worked for state legislators. So like state representatives, state senators on the state level in your state capitals. We'll talk a little bit about that later on, what those are, because some people don't know what's happening in their state capital, but I still do some advisement and work for folks in the state legislature. I've also worked for members of Congress. So I've worked on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. on the federal level. Public affairs work is a hodgepodge of, it's a mix or a combination of strategic communications work, also advising, working with legislators, policymakers, helping them define or crystallize or shape what that policy is, and messaging, talking to general audiences or constituents, talking to the general public about that policy. All of that is mixed into a recipe which becomes public affairs. So if that's sort of a plain way to sort of describe exactly what public affairs is. So I've worked on those levels. I have my own public affairs firm or business. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area. But more importantly, because of the work that I've done in public affairs, I'm always excited about teaching people about public affairs and getting more people, especially in our community, in Black communities. I grew up in North Philadelphia. And so, and grew up with limited means. And so that's very important for me for our community to understand how government works, the importance of civic literacy, about public affairs. So I'm always eager to educate young people, especially and people in our community, about public affairs. So I created, more than several years ago, the Civic Literacy and Media Influence Institute at Learn for Life, which is a publicly funded network of schools that's based primarily in California, but they also have schools, high schools, not just in California, about 50,000 students in California, also in Texas, South Carolina, and Ohio. So there's more information on them at learnforlife.org, and they're doing great work. But we talked, and then I was granted the opportunity to create this institute whereby we select these very talented high school students who have an interest in politics, public policy, public affairs, and they want to learn more about it, how it works from a public affairs professional. And we select a limited number of students each season, and we call them fellows, and they go through an intensive 12, 13-week program. So that's one of the different programs that I'm involved in. I mean, beyond that, I have my business. That's a lot of my activities are based at the bnote.com. You can go to thebnote.com and get a sense of what I'm working on. Also, I work very closely with the Council of State Governments, overseeing, directing their council on communities of color. That's, once again, the work that I do with a lot of state legislators. But the Civic Literacy Media Influence Institute is a really important project right now to me. And right now we're looking at at continuing with that, and hopefully as it moves on, expanding it.
Mm-hmm. So talking about that, because that was my next question. You said you grew up in North Philly. So what were some things that inspire you, and what would you say that is what are the primary goals for the Civic Literacy and the Media Influence Institute?
Right. So, growing up in North Philadelphia, I was born in Southern California, grew up in North Philadelphia, and then also at a certain point, at an inflection point, a very pivotal, important point in my childhood, I got an opportunity, got a full scholarship to go to a private school just outside of Philadelphia in the suburbs, predominantly white private school, elite private school, actually second oldest grade school in the country. And that offered me a chance, an opportunity to see the very stark contrast between the community I was growing up in and the community that I was going to school in, and looking at the differences, the stark economic and class and racial differences, and the struggles in the neighborhood where I was growing up in, and the relative abundance and comforts that middle to upper middle class, the upper class, wealthier white people were enjoying in a school like the one that I went to, that I eventually graduated from, as I was on that full scholarship. That experience really had a profound impact on me, on how I saw society, and how I saw society also unfolding, how I saw society, dealing with and managing all its various problems, how I saw society treating human beings, how I also saw policymakers making decisions about how people were living, we're living in different conditions, and so that inspired me to get into the arena of politics and policymaking. I just thought that was just very important. I felt like I needed to make a change or disrupt that space in some form or fashion.
It's funny listening to you. When that story you were saying. I think we've all in our communities, we've all had a story like that, and we've all had an experience like that. I remember when I used to drive trucks.
Right.
Growing up in public schools, you drive trucks, and when I got older, I was driving a truck, and I had delivered to public school and dropping off equipment. So dropping off the equipment, and as I'm, using the dollies and stuff to bring the stuff in, as you said, there was a complete difference in everything. I mean, from how the school was just structured, everything from top to bottom, and then, like you said, that it was the impact. It was a very specific moment. I was standing there. I dropped the stuff off, but I'm just kind of looking around in the room I was in, and I'm just like, it was a little overwhelming, because I'm like, man, everything is clean in here. You know what I mean? And lady had walked by. She said, "Is everything okay?" And that's when I realized, I'm like, this is really like shocking me. You know what I mean? How the school systems, just the difference in the living and everything else is just,
Right.
it's completely different. And like you said, this is one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to start this, to show a different aspect of who we are, and not
Exactly.
just what the media tells us.
That's important. Real quick here, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Mhm.
what's really important is that's why it's important for us to have always, at all times, or to attain high levels of civic literacy, right? To
Mhm.
understand how government works and how government contributes to that, because and that had a profound influence on my life, because I wondered very deeply, as a kid, and then just growing up through my teenage years and then becoming an adult. I wondered, why not just that, why why are people forced to live, or why are communities not just forced to live in separate places, but also why are they forced to live in unequal conditions? Why are certain levels of life or certain qualities of life different in one space compared to another, right? And why is that acceptable? Why is it acceptable that, say, we living in low income or moderately income Black communities in a place like North Philadelphia, why is it acceptable to live that way? Or why is it acceptable for that neighborhood to be conditioned or look that way, to be trash strewn, to have no trees, to have like nothing but, rows of houses in disrepair, some houses vacant lots, abandoned cars. And that seems like, oh, well, that's acceptable because that's a Black or a brown neighborhood, right? So why is that acceptable? But it's seen as a common thing or a standard thing where you have white people living in a neighborhood where there's plenty of trees. And see, we're learning about that as we're going through this extreme heat, right? During this climate crisis summer, so like they have, you go out to suburbs where people like that live and it's 15 degrees cooler because they've got plenty of trees, right? They've got air conditioning in their homes. The streets are clean. They have no vacant lots. There's no such thing as an abandoned car. They don't have potholes all over the place. Why is that acceptable? But you see that contrast. So how do you make that change is you do it through policy. But first, you have to learn about how to make that change, the process for arriving at that change through civic literacy. You just have to get literate. You just have to just learn about it. That's it.
So how would you define civic literacy, and what would you say are its key components?
Right. Good question, and thank you. So, civic literacy is that method by which we understand governance and how government institutions work. So it's when we're able, Ryan, to unpack the fundamentals, right, such as checks and balances of power between the major branches of government, like the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, right? It's grasping also basic knowledge of what happens between different or at different levels of government, like your local government, which is your city government, or your township government, your state government, which is the state you live in, or your federal level of government. A lot of people don't understand that those are different levels of government, right? So for example, we had for months, we had a lot of young people, a lot of fired up young people who were and angry people who were concerned about the situation unfolding in the Middle East and Gaza, right, on the Gaza Strip. So they would have these massive protests outside their city hall, and they would demand, some sort of action from their city council members, right? They would demand some kind of resolution or some kind of legislation that would demand, Israel to stop, bombing the Gaza Strip, right? To stop, or to stop Israel and Hamas from fighting and killing civilians, unarmed civilians in that part of the world. Well, a city council has no geopolitical power. A city council is not involved in foreign policy. A city council has absolutely no kind of power over the situation that's happening in any part of the world, much less Gaza, much less Ukraine, or wherever a conflict is taking place. They can have opinions or viewpoints on what's happening there. So, it was definitely, okay, we can feel the passion coming from those people, but it's misplaced energy. It's like, no, you want to go to Capitol Hill for that, and you want to talk to your federal lawmakers. You want to talk to federal lawmakers, like people who sit on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for example, or the House Foreign Relations Committee on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. about that. Or obviously you want to talk to the U.S. president, but your local and state legislators can't do anything. So you want to understand the difference between those three. And it's also not just the ability to not only understand what I just described there, but to also discern the difference between a democracy and like representative governance and other forms of government like dictatorships or totalitarian states or police states, places or societies where dissent is completely crushed. So that's what civic literacy is all about. It's just basic knowledge of governance.
What and listening to you, it's funny as you're talking, I can just replay certain situations in my life that you're talking about that I can see actually happening as I was growing. Because growing up, and I've talked to a lot of other people on the podcast about certain situations like this, but we never learned this kind of stuff in school. When you said just get literate about it, it's these are some things that you don't learn in school. It's you learn this through trial and error as you get older, and you're trying to figure out life and those things. And then it's by the time you figure those things out, it's you really shouldn't feel like that, but it's like, well, I'm 40 and I'm just learning this kind of stuff, and that's you kind of feel like you're behind the eight ball with it, but it's never too late to learn about this stuff, because at that time, then you can change. And we talked about this off the camera, but I kind of want to get into it a little bit. But what role would you say the media plays in shaping civic literacy, and how can individuals discern credible sources of information?
Right. Media plays an enormous role, particularly mainstream media, the type of media that we see every day, on our cable TV stations or cable TV, or the type of media that we see on social media streams. That's very dominant because media can set narratives. Media is in the business of story making, right? That's what media is consumed by, especially because media is also a business. And so media has to make money. Yep. And people need to understand that. So media has tremendous power over weaving these stories, over weaving these different narratives, over telling us or kind of leading us towards a visual or an image or a story of exactly of what's going on. And in weaving those narratives and those storylines, right, media can help us make decisions, or whether they're good or bad. But media is leading us on the path of making various decisions, right? Making various and very important political and policy decisions. And so that's why, and media is always intersecting with or interacting with politics, with the world of politics, the arena of politics, with policy making, and with the political class as well. We have to be very aware of how that interaction takes place, what happens at that intersection, and how it influences the way we're thinking about current events, the way we're about to make very important political decisions like at the voting booth, or the way we think about different policies. I mean, just look at the impact the media had over a span of a few weeks after one bad debate night, right? Between Trump and President Joe Biden, right? So President Joe Biden was a little wobbly during that debate night. Definitely that didn't speak to his competence as a president. We see that he's managing things pretty well. He's actually got a very good grasp on actual governance. But the storyline that came out of that night and that consumed the public imagination and conversation for over 2 weeks until we got to this new major event, which was the assassination attempt on Donald Trump recently, was this conversation about, well, is President Biden fit for office because he stumbled a bit in the debate? Okay, well, you tried debating on a national stage as a major political figure. Let's see how you do, right? So, everyone's going to have a bit. I've had bad debate days and bad debate night. You know what I mean? So, and I say this as someone who's been also in broadcast media. I just had retired from that last year, but I was in broadcast media running a daily public affairs program. for about 7 years on a major radio station out in Philadelphia. So so I know that. I understand how that is, but as someone who's also been a broadcast media professional, I understand how much media can deeply and profoundly influence how people are thinking and the decisions that they're about to make. And that can be very troubling. That can be very alarming, Ryan, when people don't understand the relationship between media. I think that it's something I think the media is definitely needed. It is the fourth pillar of democracy. You need media to provide information. It is a great information source, but it can be very dangerous and potentially deadly and destructive when people aren't understanding the relationship between media, politicians, and policymaking. That's lack of civic literacy. That's where the civic literacy component comes in.
And I think it's funny that last part you said. I think it's interesting because media knows that, and the media knows that there are not a lot of people who are civically engaged.
Right.
So if we can throw this narrative, it's a business, like you said. It's whatever can make the water boil is what we're going to use. You know what I mean? And sometimes, like you said, it's dangerous because that water is going to bubble and it's going to overflow, and that's
Right.
kind of it's almost that's what you kind of seeing now. You know what I mean? Because I think it's getting a little bit out of control. It's becoming a little bit of a circus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like you said, it's a dangerous thing. But how can educators and our community leaders foster a culture of civic literacy and engagement among our young people? Because those are the future, and they're the ones that can push things forward.
Right. And then throw social media on top of that, right? So you got mainstream traditional media, but then you've got social media right on top of that, which is where, young people, particularly Gen Z and millennials, that's where they consume or draw most of their information from. And then so disinformation is running rampant, and people are, you've got all sorts of non-facts or mythology that's all over the place, that's running rampant, and just influencing the way people see things and see the world. And that's a problem, and that's dangerous. And that's also, that comes from lack of literacy. First, real quick, before I answer your question, real quick, that comes from just general lack of literacy, because the majority of Americans, 55%, can't read beyond a sixth grade level.
That's a lot.
There's more than half. More than half of Americans can't read beyond a sixth grade level. We just take it for granted that most people can read. Most Americans cannot read at high levels, can read at a high school level, at even a high school level, much less a college level. And so that's, that's why, the segments and sequences of disinformation that we see, especially on social media platforms, are so successful, and they know it. And a lot of this is by design, particularly if you have certain sinister or insidious forces with dark agendas. And, they know that they're dealing with low information citizens, or potentially low information voters, right? Who are going to vote based on all the various mythologies or, non-facts that they're seeing streaming or flowing through social media. And that's dangerous, and when you have low levels of literacy, low levels of just basic reading literacy, which leads to low levels of civic literacy, because people can't understand or process exactly how government works when they can't read, right? You're going to have, you're definitely going to have the recipe for democratic collapse, or the collapse of a democratic society. And so that's something that we have to be very careful of. Now, how do we get young people especially more engaged? Well, one, we have to get them literate. So we're going to have to get them literate, so we're going to, especially in our community, we're going to have to put more pressure on ourselves and our pillar institutions like our churches, on our community organizations, on our social groups like our Divine Nine social groups and our HBCUs to kind of take matters into their own hands. We used to do this as a community and we lost our way, but we're going to have to be much more aggressive about it, particularly in this hypermedia landscape. That's why I like a show like yours, because that's what you're doing. You're going about that work, right? And we're going to have to start figuring out a way, okay, well, how can we take matters into our own hands and make our young people more literate, more reading literate? So they're more, they're taking their heads out of those screens, putting those video game consoles down and just reading and learning more about the world around them and assessing it and evaluating and analyzing it. So that's one, right? And then taking matters into our own hands and teaching them about civics and how fun that is. And as we're teaching, organizing, right? So, nothing holding us back from getting young people involved in the process of, registering people to get, registering people to vote, right? Or just getting young people involved in learning how to, write letters to their local legislators or to stand before, you can go to your local city council and they're going to have a time set aside where you can stand up at a podium and talk about those issues that concern you the most, or issues that you would like them to legislate on, right? Or, expose them to different spaces and different policymaking spaces and environments, whether that's through trips to your local city council or to your state legislature or to Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill. So, showing them how fun it is through a variety of creative activities. And then, we need to formalize the process of civic education more. And, since we're going to have to put, we as leaders of our community and parents and families and communities are going to have to put pressure on our schools to now say, hey, listen, we've got a serious problem here where fundamentally most of our young people, they can't just read, but also they don't know civics. They don't know, they're not civically literate. And as a result, they're not engaged, they're disengaged, and they're also demoralized and they're frustrated about what's going on around them. And so what happens is that level of disengagement and frustration just automatically, it automatically it has them jumping to conclusions about how governments are working today. They just sort of give up, throw their hands up in the air and say, oh, you know what, this is not working for me. The change that I want, I can't get it because nothing's going on. Government's not doing anything for me. It's like, well, this is the other key thing here too, Ryan. It's important to let people know, especially young people know, that government is not something that's detached from them, right? They are the government. We are the government. We, as people, as constituents and residents and citizens, we're the government. We're the ones who put the demands on elected officials and policymakers to make those changes. Because, they're really, those elected officials and politicians and what have you, they're not going to know what we want unless we tell them, right? Unless we first vote them into office and we tell them. So really, in reality, we have to and that's a moment of empowerment for young people when we tell them, hey, listen, you know what? Actually, you're the government. So start acting like it. Oh, okay, well, this is how you do that.
And it's how much confidence that can build in somebody, you know what I mean? Just to know I'm going out here and I'm saying what I need to say and I can get these laws changed because I am the government. And people don't, like you said, the demoralization, that's what that does. I mean, they got people walking around where it's just like, it's almost like like almost a sad society almost. Because I remember growing up where churches used to be in the community. You seen churches all the time outside. On the weekends, they had, get-togethers in the middle of the park, and those were some things you couldn't escape, and that was a community. But there's really no sense of community anymore. You know what I mean? We have to, like you said, we got to put more pressure on our leaders, on our schools, because you look at the schools now. I mean, it's the kids are exposed to not only social media, which you talked about, but just everything else. I mean, they're just exposed to too much.
They are.
It, it's
It's overwhelming.
it's dangerous.
It's dangerous. I I tell young people in my institute, my fellows,
Mhm.
to, as they're learning about civics or learning more about civics, learning more about how government functions and how they can participate in it. I tell them to apply a formula. It's almost like a mathematical formula to how you become a much more effective citizen or generator of good governance. And it's p+p+p equals O, right? So let me explain that and break it down and tell people what that means. It's the formula for full empowered civic participation. And how you get that is, one, the first P is the protest demand. Everyone has a demand. Everyone's protesting. They're either yelling out loud at their local city hall or their state capitol or even Capitol Hill, and they're yelling, and sometimes they're waving placards, and they're pointing their fingers at politicians and making all kinds of accusations about what they're doing, what they should be doing, or what they're doing, and how much they disagree. That's the protest moment. We had that. Remember, we had that big protest moment for ourselves as a community during the civil rights movement, when we wanted to do away with Jim Crow, which a lot of people have forgotten about. That was just 60 years ago.
Yeah,
So,
not
you know,
long.
it wasn't that long ago. So the protest demand is the first step. It's just letting the governance structure letting society know, letting everyone know what you want. Okay, so that's the first P. The second P, however, you can't really do anything with that protest demand until you get involved in the politics. That's the second P, the politics, the political process. And the political process is the process whereby we get folks elected who are aligned with, they don't have to fully agree with, but they're as closely aligned with our protest demand as possible, as we can possibly make them. So we got to, we identify candidates and potential elected officials whom we like, who agree with us or maybe are closely aligned with us, and we get them elected into office. That's the politics. And we vote, by the way. That's
Yes.
getting involved in the political process, or you see candidates that you like. This doesn't have to be you engaged in, I mean, it could be any variety of ways that takes place. It could be you actually organizing your community or a group of people to identify a candidate, maybe create a political action committee, I don't know, to get candidates identified and recruited and elected, or it could just be you as an individual voter going to the voting booth and having your voice heard that way. But once again, that is the second P. That is essential. Now, the third P is, now after you have them elected, now what? That takes you to the third P, which is a really important piece. That's the policy making. That's the piece we forget about. So, and that takes a lot of patience. That's going to take a long time. But the more civic literacy we've consumed, the more we understand how policymaking works, how they make a bill, and how you get a bill passed. Because just because you craft or introduce a bill doesn't necessarily mean you'll get it passed. That takes a lot of hard work. And you could, as a citizen, whether you're young or old, you could become involved in that process by becoming a voice behind those elected officials that you like or that you feel aligned with, by helping them pass those bills. And not just resolutions that are congratulating people for having, congratulating someone of note or stature in a community for having a birthday or for reaching a milestone. Or, that's not a bill. I mean, a bill that makes real change in your community. So the third P is policymaking. All of that, at the end of the day, Ryan, results in O, the outcome. So, and the outcome is the change. So p+p+p equals O. That's the mathematical formula for civic participation that people need to understand. It's as simple as that. So if you're not really going to achieve anything. You're not going to, see that or, or even experience that change that you've been longing for until you combine all of those different P's to get to that outcome.
And listening to you, it's not difficult at all to have that formula. But I think, without the literacy, all we do is the protest part, and then it usually stops.
That stops.
You know what I mean? It's not as you was explaining it. I'm like, yeah, I mean that's
Right.
that's what you do. But it's once and it just goes to show again, we're not we don't have enough knowledge on it because we're just doing what we seen years ago with the civil rights movement. If we
Right.
protest, then we'll get it heard.
Right.
And the policy and the government understands that now. We
Right.
understand how to adjust to that. You're just going to get to this far, and then you're going to stop. So
Right.
we're just going to let you protest. We'll let you do it, and it's so much more than it's,
So
and
much more.
that's why I think the things that you're doing also with with your vision behind the B note. I just think I've read into it. I've read into it and started looking into that kind of stuff. But if you could tell us more about the mission and the vision behind the B note.
Right. So, the B note is just carrying out that mission of not just civic literacy and, trying to steer people away from, the constant barrage of mainstream media narratives, but to, also try to create a pathway towards information that they're real critical information they need to know that they're not familiar with. And so
Mm,
that's what we're trying to do with the B note and try to expose them to also directly to policymaker voices that they're not hearing. So, I'm doing that through, I have a podcast as well that's shared there at thebnote.com called Decision Makers, where I talk primarily with state legislators and
mhm,
getting more people familiar with what's happening in their state capitals. Low levels of civic literacy have created a situation where people don't even know that they have a state capital. They think that their state capital is Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. I was just, actually, as a joke, someone was telling someone who works in a legislature, who's like the head of an agency at a state legislature. I'm not going to tell you the state because I don't want to embarrass the person
yeah,
or put that elected official out there. But they were telling me how just a couple of years ago, a person was elected to their state senate, and they were under the impression that they had just been elected to the U.S. Senate. And when they're arriving, they're excited. They're thinking, "Okay, I just got elected to the U.S. Senate." And they're like, "No, you got elected to this state's Senate, and we need you to arrive at this state's capital. This is where you need to arrive for work." And that person was stunned. Like, just that person just didn't know the difference between. So, but that's not an unusual thing. People frequently, frequently, I mean, always incorrectly answer that question about the difference between their state capital and Capitol Hill. So the B note is the B note's mission is to also show that is to also create some kind of connection or to create a bridge between
mhm,
the grassroots, which are folks on the ground level, the citizens, folks in the community, and also the grass tops, the influencers, the policymakers, the decision makers, to kind of create some, I've been trying to develop a bridge
mhm.
between those two sets of people, so that there are more direct conversations and so that there's more literacy and more understanding and knowledge that's taking place.
What have you what personal experiences for you has shaped your views on the importance of civic engagement?
Mm. So even for me, like I can give you a recent example. civic engagement comes down to even just something simple as filling a pothole, right? I had, close to where I live, there was a road that had this massive and dangerously huge pothole forming that had been there for weeks, as a result of like constant erosion from rainstorms and just traffic going along that road. And it was dangerous. You had to avoid the pothole, and in the process of avoiding the pothole, because it was just a 2-lane road, you could hit some incoming cars. And the even worse about it, it was on a hill, at the top of a hill on a turn. And so civic engagement is, okay, well, let's find out who can fill that pothole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So because that pothole has to be filled so I don't get hurt, my family doesn't get hurt, and someone else in the community and other families don't get hurt as well, right? Because we could have a situation where on that same road, and this had happened several years ago, where there was an intersection that didn't have, very busy intersection, didn't have a stoplight, and there was a young 8th grade brother who ran cross country, who was running across that road and was tragically killed. And see, but for years, people were just adjusting to and accepting that there was this very busy intersection that didn't have a stoplight, and it took a life getting killed for it finally to get a stoplight. So imagine if the community had been more civically engaged, we could have saved a life. And that young brother, he was doing well in school. He was an honor student, and he was a star cross country runner, and we'll never know. So because of just the absence of a stoplight. So that's on a personal level. When you see those things, that's what civic engagement is. People think that, oh, that's just things that I pay taxes for that. No, it's not just about you pay taxes for that. And it's not just these are things, menial tasks that your local government does. These are essential components of a well-oiled, well-running society and community. It's when we're contributing to the common good. Or, here's another story. When I was on broadcast radio in Philadelphia, I used to talk on a daily public affairs show, but I also talk a lot about climate crisis and about the environment, and about how Black communities especially we must have a conversation about the environment. This is the climate crisis, climate change discussion is actually our top issue on a lot of levels, because it intersects with a lot of other problems and issues. It aggravates a lot of other problems and issues we're having. But we acquiesce that conversation to say like white liberals or white progressives who command that conversation for the most part. But it's a conversation we should be having, because for example, in low income, moderately income communities, it aggravates and it causes it increases violent crime. Look, remember that classic movie, Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee? He was onto something about the association between heat and violence. Yep. That's a common thing. So, there are ways to reduce the heat in a community. Or, if you clean, and I was I created a whole movement on my radio show on the station, and the elected officials were paying attention, because I said, hey, listen, if you plant more trees in our communities, Philadelphia has 50,000 vacant lots in that city alone. If you remove all the vacant lots, you repair all the abandoned homes. You also you take a series of other steps where remove all the abandoned cars. For example, you clean up, you remove all the trash. You could see and at the time that I was doing this, Philadelphia was going through this horrific violent wave. I think you remember that violence wave too. You probably heard about it. Yep. There was one year we had like 600 people were murdered. Yep. And I'm like, but if you combine these very effective, efficient, and inexpensive solutions, you could reduce the violent crime rate by anywhere from 75 to 93%.
And it
just
was
by doing that.
And in Philadelphia, what you were talking about, and over that 600, more than half of that was in the summertime during the heat.
During the heat.
Yeah.
During the heat. Exactly. Imagine if, it's just, of course, you have to make investments in those communities, but that's part of the investment is radically transforming the environment. And these are quick fixes. radically transforming the environment that people are living in, because that's creating a lot of grief and struggle, unnecessary struggle. And you can actually create jobs and not just employment, but small business opportunities, it's not just about lowering the temperature in terms of violence, but a number of other things. That sparked a whole new conversation in the city. Suddenly, people in the city were like, wait a second, how come we aren't getting this? And I said, you know what? And so people would call into the radio station and say, that's not going to happen. Where do you have proof or evidence that that's going to work? 5 miles outside the city in Montgomery County,
I know.
where the wealthy
Yeah.
and primarily white people live. They're not dealing with violent communities so it's, of course, we've proven that. So elected officials, especially on the city and state level, they noticed that conversation, and now Philadelphia has a new mayor who is and I had a big debate. I had an environmental debate before she got elected, where I hammered the candidates, with questions about the environment and changing it. So now, she has rolled out an aggressive clean and green program throughout the city. Like, it's so aggressive that, some people are grumbling. They're like, oh, this is a little bit too aggressive. But she's like, no. We're going to finally clean this city up. We're going to clean it up. We're going to remove all those vacant lots and those abandoned cars and everything. We're going to make Philly look like a new city. So that's just from a personal experience, how, once again, you can pull certain levers of civic engagement, and through, also educating people about, because I was also at the same time educating people about, like, okay, well, here are the different people, the different policymakers you need to call, or the different spaces you need to go into to apply pressure. So as I was applying pressure on air, I was also encouraging people to apply pressure on policymakers as well. And that sparked a whole new movement.
And going back a little bit to what you were talking about people, with the taxpaying, the taxpayer money goes into this stuff. And I always say, if you're paying a tax on it, why? I almost feel like we kind of pick and choose where we care about where our money's going.
Right.
But if you're getting taxed every paycheck, why wouldn't you want to know where your money's going? I mean, it's going right to those things. So if you're paying for that, you have the opportunity to open your mouth and say, this needs to be fixed. And if a lot of people would actually understand, again, as I got older, I started doing a whole bunch of reading, and it's just weird. The school, I never cared about reading or anything when I was in school. I wanted to just, be outside and just play and have fun. But as I've got older, all I do now is just read, and it just, we were talking about off camera how it just, the more knowledge you get, it's just,
right.
it's so helpful. But if people would understand in those inner cities what is actually going on,
yeah,
you would really want to just quickly, like you said, people were like, oh, this is a little bit too aggressive. If you knew in most inner cities, what I know of just the East Coast,
right,
the inner cities, if they're building these houses on trash, on trash.
right.
They're dumping all the, sometimes that's where they would dump all the trash, and then you just cover it up and sit the houses on top of it. And it's like you're inhaling all of this trash waste. If you knew that,
right,
you would want the most aggressive thing just to change it immediately.
right.
And that's where a lot of diseases come from. That's what you're talking about with a lot of the different things with, violence, and people walking around angry don't even know why. It's the environment.
Exactly. It's the environment, and you absolutely, I mean, the thing about taxes too is that not only is it a matter of knowing where your hard-earned money is going into, and just hope and knowing that there's some results or outcomes from that money, but it's necessary. You should be happy that those type of services are being provided, because that's what's called the social contract. There's a philosopher, there's this, I think he's like 17th, Thomas Hobbes, who came up with that term, the philosopher, the social contract. In order to have a good, solid government, a strong government that serves your needs, everyone has to contribute to it. That's why like excessive tax cuts for the wealthy are so inefficient, but so sinister and insidious, because it's like they have to, they can still stay wealthy, but hey, you know what, you're going to have to pay your fair share too, so you can ensure that the social contract still exists and that society still functions, that we still all function, that we can pay for these things. So that's all contributing to the common good, all that common stability. And people don't understand that. So, we should happily be paying our taxes. So as a result, we can get those potholes filled, we can get all that trash cleaned up, we can ensure that people are living in decent environments, and also that, there's no violence,
Yeah.
or there's very limited violence, right? And so, but, once again, you're not going to, you can't just pay your taxes and expect those results. You have to engage in some level of civic engagement. And in order to do that, you have to be civically literate. And, even our ancestors back in the civil rights movement, they were on a very, a lot of people think it was just protesting, but it was very sophisticated. Yeah, there was a lot of protesting going on, but they also carried out the two other P's. There was also, like, Dr. King, for example, he was engaged in a lot of negotiation and a lot of conversation with policymakers to get key pieces of legislation passed, like the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, right? And then he was, there were also, and right after the Voting Rights Act, we saw an explosion of Black people being elected to office on the local, state, and federal level. Now where it's a common thing. It's a common thing now to see a Black member of Congress or a Black mayor or a Black member of a city council. That wasn't a common thing back in the day. We had to get pieces of legislation passed, in order to then formulate, and to get the kind of policy or get the kind of outcomes we needed. So they laid out a very specific plan to get us to the point that we are at now, and which is why we're in such a dangerous moment where a lot of that is in the process of getting rolled back. We've already lost very essential, strong components of the Voting Rights Act. That's dangerous, something that we just got 60 years ago.
Where do you see, what do you see as the future of civic literacy and engagement in the next decade, I would say?
I'm going to be optimistic, because I'm going to be optimistic, and I'm not going to be optimistic in any kind of misleading way. I'm not trying to pull anyone's leg. I'm not trying to sound corny about this. I'm going to be optimistic because I think that in a moment like this, Ryan, I think as we go through this moment, and it is a very tense, very noxious, precarious moment that we're in, I think we're going to learn. So, as the saying goes, you messed around, there's another word that they use, but I'm not going to use that word on this one. You messed around and you found out. I think a lot of people are going to mess around and they're going to find out. I'm optimistic about, the outcomes even for this particular election. And there's like elections taking place globally, worldwide. This is a historic year for the globe. Over 2 billion people worldwide right now are voting in critical places like here, the United States, India, England, France. It's a major moment going on, and it's happening at a pivotal moment in our collective human history, especially as we're faced with climate crisis, right? But I think that as people are shifting through this moment, they're gonna learn some very hard lessons, but that'll put us on the right path and on the right direction. They'll understand, oh, you know what, we should. They'll then shift and sort of rearrange their priorities and how we've been going about this all along. And I think, young people too, they're seeing it, even on social media, in those conversations we're saying amongst young people and the types of issues that they're focused on and the change they want to see. Like I said, issues like climate crisis and the environment, that's a high priority for young people because they're like, well, that's their future. So, and they're wondering what can we do to fix this? And so that's where civic literacy and civic engagement comes in. And I think that I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot more of that. I really do. because I think there's going to be a lot of angst and frustration at first and potential conflict. But then what comes out of that is people saying, oh, well, hey, listen, you'll have a generation of leaders. It's already happening now. We're going to say, wait a second. This is how you do it. This is how you get to this result or this outcome.
So I got one more question for you. Before I ask this question, Charles, I appreciate you, for all the knowledge that you've given today. It's just it I always like highlighting, people like yourself because, for me, I that's what gets the most joy out of me. I like to step back and just honor everybody else and just let them, because what you're doing is it's a lot of hard work. A lot of people, you're so focused on sometimes just keeping your head down and you just working. Sometimes, sometimes we do it so much that, we don't get a chance to stop and just kind of sit down and just breathe. So I just want you to know that, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. You're online exactly what you're supposed to do. And it's working, because we're seeing the changes, being made that, in the field that you're in. So I just wanted to, say that to you. But do you have any, social media outlets and stuff that you want to get out to the audience?
I definitely go to thebnote.com. That's regularly updated. So I always encourage people to go there to look at the latest content. THEBE note.com. Also, I'm on Twitter at the B Note. So that's pretty easy. That's pretty simple. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, CD Ellison on LinkedIn. So that's pretty simple to engage with me or connect with me there. But the more about, once again, the Civic Literacy Media Influence Institute at Learn for Life. You can go to learnforlife.org to learn more about that and what we're doing with that. I wish we could just open it up to the public. Maybe that'll happen at some point.
Yeah.
But right now, that's limited to Learn for Life students. But for those who by chance live in California, Texas, South Carolina, Ohio, a wonderful network of schools are doing some great work. And, you may have a young person that you may want to have join one of these schools. So learn more at learnforlife.org. And, then maybe you'll have an opportunity to get a fellowship because there's also $1,000 stipend at the end of the intensive 12, 13-week course. So, the fellows graduate with $1,000. If they finish everything, then they receive $1,000 grant. And also they get an opportunity, there's some of their work's been published in the bnote.com as well. So that's where you can reach me. That's where you can find my work currently.
Okay, so final question. What is it, through everything that you've done, what is it that you learned about yourself mentally and spiritually?
That's a good question. Well, I have found out that over the years that I'm much more resilient probably than I give myself credit for being, right? So I think a lot of us are a lot more resilient than we think, right? And I've also learned that, that over the years that the most important thing is family. So, and the reason I say that, and especially over this past year, this past year has been very pivotal for me. I learned as an adult that I have epilepsy. And in the process of and actually I learned the very hard way. And that's why I retired from broadcast media. I had a seizure, a very violent one on air while I was broadcasting. And it just so happened I was broadcasting out of my home studio. And my wife was home working and she saved my life in the process. So, especially when you have family and a good solid family foundation behind you, backing you up, and you have a companion, a best friend and a partner who's there with you. There's just nothing more important than that. She's really just the most important person in my life. And she's a remarkable woman. We'll be married. We've been together for like 30 years. So, she's just been doing some remarkable work as both wife and mother too. So, and she's the reason why I am where I am now as a veteran public affairs strategist doing this work. I would not doing this type of work, Ryan. I'll be honest with you, because we met in college. It would not have been possible without her support. So that's the thing that I've learned about myself, over the years, or that I've appreciated about myself, more and more, is about resilience. But you're not going to have that resilience without that strong, support and family foundation.
No, that's true. I'm listening to you. You sound exactly like me. I'll be saying to myself, I'm like, me and my wife been together 17 years, and
Wow.
I'm like, there's no way.
You're right.
Like when you look back on it, it's like there's no way I would have been this person.
Right. No way.
If I don't, and I don't, I know what it is because God gives you a helpmate to do that. Because
Right.
again, we're very straightforward. And
Right.
a woman's vision, she's always thinking. She's always trying to,
Always.
sometimes it may be a little frustrating because sometimes it's just, but that's who they are and they need the help.
That's
And
right.
in those times, like you said, of the most difficult times that you go through, it's like they're right there.
It's
You know
right
what I
there.
mean? It's like it's just
Right.
without a doubt. It's like, you know what, it's all right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's made me she's made me extremely resilient and getting through, some really difficult times. But she's also been there during the happiest of times. Like that's where that profound happiness comes from. Just I mean, a lot of these lessons that I'm sharing with you today and your audience, I've learned from her. Just or in terms of how to look at it. And her and I, come from different worlds too. Like I grew up in North Philadelphia. She grew up in the Caribbean. So, and
Wow.
just had, so having that kind of, and raising our daughters in that too, having, that kind of conversation from those different perspectives is a very like fulfilling experience. But so she just has a lot of wisdom about her, and so I just appreciate that about her. So I just that was the one thing. I'm sorry,
No, no, that's good.
yeah, I'm getting I'm feeling a little bit emotional right now as I'm talking about it, but yeah, I just that's been the most important thing to me over the years. The one thing that I've learned about myself.
It's good though. It's good to hear stories like that though, because again, we was talking about media. The narrative of things is always, you
Yeah,
know, marriage ain't this, and it's divorce rate is like this. But when you talk to
right.
people who are married, it's like, I'm not going back out there, man. I'm like,
No,
I'm good over here. It's like,
good. Yeah.
yeah,
So
it's like y'all just, I don't know what y'all being told, but
right.
it's
Uh,
nonsense. It's just,
no, just that have that foundation.
yeah, man.
And,
You need it, and you can't. No matter how much you think you can achieve on your own,
right,
you need that person to help you elevate to that next level. It's
right.
no way possible you can do it.
And with that foundation, anything's possible.
Yeah, man.
Anything's possible.
And it makes everything so much easier.
Right.
So, Charles, I can't tell you how appreciative I am of you, man, to stop by my podcast and just bless my bless my brand, man. You've again you've I'm walking away here with some more knowledge, and I'm always appreciative of that. Just continue to do what you do, and hopefully we can stay connected. And I'm
Let's
gonna
do it.
all the information that you gave for your pages and the websites and everything. I'm gonna put that down in the description when I edit the video. So
Great.
yeah, we're gonna stay connected. I'm gonna reach out to you on LinkedIn and keep doing what you're doing.
That's all right. You do the same. I am an avid fan of your podcast, Ryan.
Appreciate that.
Continue doing the good work.
You're on YouTube, baby.